Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that I've been stuck on for the past 2 weeks because it is quite lengthy, and one that is about warring gods and magical knights of a sort and fantasy and all of that. I am referring to Oathbringer, the third book, maybe the fourth, but like the third book in the Knights Radiant Stormlight Archives series, which was written by Brandon Sanderson and published in 2017. Talked about Brandon Sanderson on this channel before, so I don't need to go into that great of detail. He's a fantasy writer primarily. He was known for finishing up Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series. And then he started work on his own fantasy stuff, including the Mistborn series and the Stormlight Archives series, which I'm talking about here. And he's won a number of awards for his work. And there's sort of like a lot of critical praise, but also some people, noting that he's not as good a writer as other people claim, which I can see some credence in those arguments, because he does have a number of problems, which I'll talk about later in the analysis section here. But I found Oathbringer to be quite good. Once again, I'm going to spoil this book because if you most likely have already made it to the third book if you're clicking on this video. So if you haven't, go back and read the first book and then follow my videos from there. But without further ado, let's talk about Oathbringer. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we'll move on from there. So Oathbringer focuses on the usual cast of characters like Dalinar, Kaladin, Adolin, and Shallan, all with really silly names and whatnot. But it begins with a prologue where Gavilar, who was assassinated at the beginning of the first book, reveals to Ashonai, one of the Parshendi, that he intends to bring back the Parshendi's gods because he wants to elevate humanity in some capacity, and Ashonai is worried because that would most likely destroy all the humans and get them killed. And so the story then flashes forward back to the present and focuses on the main characters, all converging on the Battle of Thaylen City, which we see later. So I'll just cover some of their journeys here. It focuses on Dalinar as he's leading people in Urithiru. He's been named the king, but he's having trouble uniting the various kingdoms in an effort to focus on the Parshendi, as some of them want to have diplomatic truces with them. Not many people trust Dalinar because he was once a bloodthirsty warrior. And we see a couple chapters from Dalinar's past, much in the same way we saw Kaladin and Shallan's past in previous volumes, where he was indeed a bloodthirsty warrior known as the Blackthorn, very aggressive in his fight. And then when a rebel kingdom rose up, he basically burned it down, and in the process accidentally killed his wife for very interesting reasons, which I'll note later. But this all, like, nobody knows that he killed his wife. They all think it was part of that kingdom, but he's felt a lot of guilt since then, and his memories are starting to flood back from that time. He is seeking allies, but again, it's hard for them to really trust him. He learns about the cycle of desolations, and how eventually the heralds just gave up trying to protect humanity and left one of their own in hell to guard from the Voidbringers coming back. And Dalinar even speaks to Odium, the god who wants everyone dead, and Dalinar challenges him to a contest of champions, but Odium notes that he doesn't want to do that, and he's going to use Dalinar to kill everybody, but doesn't reveal how he's going to do that. Eventually, he does make alliances with Thaylen and the Azish empires through the use of visions that he has, but he's able to send those visions to other people. And this eventually results in them joining, but having troubles because Dalinar and company learn about the origins of the Voidbringers and how they were originally humans who came from another planet after destroying their own world, and eventually betrayed the Parshendi, whose planet Roshar originally was. And this makes everyone at some level of uncomfortable. It's all revealed to be Teravangian's great plan to undermine Dalinar and become king himself, or something like that. And this eventually leads to Dalinar in Thaylen City when Odium's forces attack. The story also focuses on Kaladin as he returns home, reunites with his family in a very touching moment, and discovers that some Parshendi are trying to flee as they've grown sentient and no longer want to be slaves. And so he follows them and tries to better understand them, and comes into contact with the Fused, who are actually the Voidbringers controlling the Parshendi. They're gathering a Parshendi army, and they plan on attacking Kholinar, which once Kaladin comes back to Irithiru, he works with Shallan, Adolin, and King Elokar to get to Kholinar, infiltrate it, and help the people rise up and fight off the Voidbringers. Unfortunately, Kholinar ends up falling, and King Elokar ends up dying as in the process, which fills Kaladin with a lot of dread and sadness that he keeps losing people. And he ends up in Shadesmar with Shallan. And so Shallan is also the focus of this story, as she learned, or sort of recalled, that she killed her mother thanks to her Knight's Radiant powers in her youth. She's been dealing with that guilt, doesn't really understand who she is, and is investigating murders in Irithiru, one of which was due to Adolin killing Sadeas in the previous volume. And she's investigating it, but also unrelated murders as well, and is still investigating the Ghostbloods too, who want to use the Voidbringer powers in an effort to gain their own control over humanity. Eventually, Shallan sort of splits her persona and becomes Veil to investigate this, and becomes Radiant to display her Knight's Radiant powers, which leads her to an identity crisis. But she also comes into contact with the Midnight Mother, an unmade sort of spren-like creature that has been killing humans in Irithiru, to better understand them. She manages to scare it away, but it kind of wrecks her mind a little bit. And she later finds out that Jasna is still alive, but Jasna is kind of disappointed in her because she's not fully invested in bettering herself or anything like that. And Jasna kind of pushes her to do better. And this eventually leads to Shallan going to Kaladin, or going to Kholinar with Kaladin, dealing with that identity crisis through a conversation with Wit, which helps increase her confidence a little bit. And then she too goes to Shadesmar when the Oathgate kind of breaks, and they all have to head to the Oathgate in the Shadesmar version of Thaylen City, and fight a lot of Spren and Fused who are in that realm as well along the way. And then we see a couple chapters focusing on Szeth, who's become a Knight's Radiant, but one who delivers justice. And he's supposed to deliver justice for the Parshendi because this is their land, but he eventually sides with Dalinar because he sees him as one who truly knows the truth. We also see Venli, who was Eshonai's sister, frustrated with the treatment of the Parshendi by the humans, and siding with Odium in all of this, although it's clear that she doesn't fully support his cause, and is disturbed by the powers that the humans are displaying and how noble they can sometimes be. And all of this leads to the Battle of Thaylen City, which is grand and epic, like 300 or so pages of amazing writing. We see Szeth siding with the humans here, and eventually Kaladin manages to save Dalinar, and Dalinar manages to fight off Odium, where he learns that Odium has sort of been controlling him, might have been responsible for the death of his wife, but Dalinar refuses to let him take control of him, and he accepts responsibility for that and grows in the process. And then he manages to beat back Odium's forces a little bit and save Thaylen City, but there's still war at hand here. And Moash, one of the bridgemen who left Kaladin's crew, he's the one who assassinated Elhokar in Kholinar. And then he's also tasked with assassinating an old herald, which he does and kind of messes with the other Radiants as the story comes to a close. And again, as the story comes to a close, we see that Jasnah is queen and Shallan finally marries Adolin. And that's where the story ends there, with a lot of other plot threads to tie up. In terms of analysis, boy howdy is there quite a bit to talk about. It's always hard to fully summarize Oathbringer or these Stormlight Archives series, because there's just so many plots to follow, so many things to cover. But I do like how Sanderson is covers touches upon a few ideas in the story and really focuses on them. One of those things in particular is Dalinar's task, which I would say unity or preparedness in battle, just being ready for the war that is to come, this devastation that he can't seem to stop. And so Dalinar is asked, or he's tasked really, to unite the kingdoms in a time of great war. It's really hard, especially because he was the Blackthorn. He was a battle-hardened warrior who worked with his brother to take over several kingdoms, and he earned a legendary status, but also infamy, in that now nobody really wants to trust him, because if you do, this could all be a trick, and he could just be using it to kill you or take over your kingdom, which might hurt your people. And so this goal of unity is very difficult for Dalinar to achieve. He's hindered by his own past, not only in his actions, making it difficult for the other kingdoms to trust him, difficult to engage in diplomacy and politics, but also hindered by personally, because he's recalling all the bad things that he did, not only to those other kingdoms, but also to his wife. The way that he treated her and how he ended up killing her while he was under the influence of odium. And so you might say, well, it's not his fault, but he claims that it is his fault. And so his understanding of that prevents him from fully recognizing his responsibility, or fully wanting to engage in leadership, because what if he hurts other people in a similar way? And he kind of turns to drinking again for a little bit in this story. You also see scheming lords like Taravangian, who are just trying to undermine Dalinar for the sake of gaining their own power, which gets Sadeas killed in the previous volume, and might get Taravangian killed in a future volume. And in the magnitude of odium, realizing that he is a very powerful god and can't seem to be stopped by Dalinar and the Knights Radiant alone. They need so many other people to fight off him and the growing Voidbringer force, which is made more difficult by them not really having the moral high ground. But it also seems like, as I've been touching upon, Dalinar's quest of unity also hinges on his personal redemption, because you can unite the people all that you want, but if you don't think that you're an effective leader, if you're hindered by the bad stuff that's happened to you in your past, if you're affected by your own personal trauma, and you're not really doing anything to overcome that, or at least attempt it, you're not going to be an effective leader. You're not even going to want to lead, because you're going to be like, why me? What makes me worthy of leading? We saw that with Shallan and Kaladin in Words of Radiance and the Way of Kings, where their trauma prevented them from effectively leading, and they needed to approach that trauma and address it effectively in order to be better leaders and gain control of their powers to the fullest extent possible, and able to overcome these dark forces. So there's unity here through personal growth, which is a very great message for Sanderson to be writing here. It's very powerful writing, because it's not simply these physical forces that we have to overcome. It's the cognitive forces. We have to understand who we were and come to terms with our past. Dalinar does not simply move on from the person that he was. He accepts who he was, realizes that he's changed a great deal since then, and strives to be a better person in the future. Essentially the Way of Kings, essentially becoming achieving or becoming the person you were always destined to be through a reckoning with the horrors of your past. And Sanderson touches on this similarly with Shallan, with trauma and especially with identity. Shallan seeks to escape into illusion in this story, to deal with guilt and responsibility. Guilt in that she knows that she may have accidentally used her radiant powers to kill her mother in the past, and it kind of ruined and wrecked her entire family. And then the responsibility that she's dealing with, where she has to lead other Radiant Knights and investigate murders and just try to hold everyone together as best she can. And she wants only to run away and avoid all of this responsibility, which is very familiar when you're like saddled with an immense task. Maybe not as big as what Dalinar has to do, but still mighty big in a time of war and whatnot. And as a result of this, she creates the identities of Vale and Radiant. Vale as a means of investigating murders, of being a street tough kind of person who who isn't Shallan, who isn't as naive as her. It's not actually her, it's just a disguise that she's put it on that maybe fools other people who aren't in the know. And then Radiant is just a Knight Radiant kind of version of herself who is capable of using her powers to the best extent, fake it till you make it. But she's forced to reckon with her inexperience in this story, reckon with all the guilt and the trauma that she's repressing, because she can pretend to be Vale all she wants, but she's not Vale. There's a good quote that I would like to read to you from this. She sniffled, looking away. I have to become Vale to escape the memories, but I don't have the experience that she pretends to have. I haven't lived her life. And there's Shallan talking to Wit in this story, where she's like, I don't want to deal with who I am, so I became somebody else. But I'm not that person. No matter how much I try to be that person, I'm still Shallan, and I don't have the knowledge and experience that Vale has. And as a result, she gets some people killed. And again, she's forced to reckon with that inexperience, reckon with the things that she's trying to run away from. But at the end of the story, Shallan finds herself strengthened by personal growth, by learning to use her powers and coming to terms with the death of her family and realizing that she's no longer that person. She's able to achieve enough personal growth to fully use her Knight's Radiant powers. There's a point in the story which is really rad where she separates into three different beings, Vale, Radiant, and Shallan, who all kind of give her different, or herself, they all kind of give her advice there. And it's after the battle is done, she has a conversation with them where they're kind of contradictory towards one another, and then she shoves them back into her mind, and she's like, they may be me, but they are not me. I am them. They are all just a facet of my being, different parts of who I am. And so it sounds like she's coming to understand who she is and what she's capable of, which is, again, talking about the trauma and also coming to recognize that you have to address these sort of underlying problems if you're ever going to achieve greatness. And again, related to all of that, another big theme of what Sanderson is talking about here is emotion and passion. All humans seem to be guided by passion in the world of Roshar, and in other worlds that Sanderson seems to be writing as well. Just driven by their emotions, their desire for power, their desire to get over their trauma, to escape pain, all of that. Odium recognizes that in the story. When he's having a conversation with Dalinar, he's like, I fully recognize who and what humans are, and I plan to exploit that. Allow me to read you another interesting quote from this. Odium smiled. Passion, son, glorious, wondrous passion. Emotion, it is what defines men, though ironically you are poor vessels for it. It fills you up and breaks you unless you find someone to share the burden. And that's really Odium talking about how he plans to exploit men, but he's recognizing that humans are emotional beings, but too much emotion just breaks them, and they become incapable of focusing on the task at hand. And Odium is talking about that in regards to how he plans to use Dalinar, which he eventually reveals like he's going to flood Dalinar with all the emotions that he tried to hold back, and use that as a means of controlling Dalinar when he's like, I give in, I don't want to feel this anymore. But Dalinar recognizes, you can't just escape that emotion, you can't escape who you were, you have to take responsibility of your past, which I love that Sanderson doesn't just try to have Dalinar go around the fact that he killed his wife. He's accepting responsibility for it. And you see more of this emotion in the idea of the thrill, which is really just like another dark spren that is controlling Dalinar at certain moments. But it's like the thrill is simply using emotion as a weapon, in this case, rage. And then you have this contrasted against the contentment that Radiants are supposed to feel. Yes, they can be angry and vindictive and rageful, but they have to balance their emotions, kind of like with Buddhism, or it takes control of them and they become ineffective fighters. And then you have Kaladin in the middle throughout this entire story, where he's trying to reach the contentment of the Radiants to advance up a level or two, but he's still guided by his trauma and his sadness of his past, which he's been doing for 3 stories at this point. And I do feel that's one of the weaknesses of the series, where Kaladin's been sad for 3 books. It's like, come on, address your pain by now, buddy, or at least try to move on. You can't just simply be held back only to grow when the plot demands that you grow, or something like that. But it really is interesting how Sanderson writes about emotion and passion here. There are other great things about this story, particularly with Moash and the caste system, where Moash recognizes that Roshar is pretty broken, and that excusing the Parshendi slavery, there's still a caste system that exists. And because of this, like Moash is like, why should I work for the humans? They've only ever like let me down and haven't really given me the life that I probably want or deserve. And so he's like, yeah, I'll work with the Voidbringers. Like if the system needs to be destroyed, I might as well work with them. Like the system is damaged, so who cares who I side with, which is a very dangerous kind of mindset to have, but shows the great inequality that exists in this world. Although I do feel like Sanderson is kind of bypassing the caste system of the Dark Eyes and Light Eyes in exchange for the Parshendi slavery system. It's like, if you got to address both of those, because those are both like wide-scoping systems of inequality that you can't just leave in place. And it doesn't really seem like he's marching in that direction. And then there's also the idea of bucking tradition, how there's the way things have been done, especially with belief in religion and Almighty. And Dalinar is bucking it, which gets him kind of excommunicated in this story. But Dalinar and other people know that you can't simply do things the way they've been done before, because it's only led to harm and pain, and doing things the way they've been done before has led to a series of desolations that have brought humanity to this very point. So tradition isn't always the best. And of course, the last thing I'll note are the battles. Like the Battle of Dalinar is pretty grand and epic, but the Battle of Thaylen City is magnificent. It's some of the best writing that I've seen, not only from Sanderson, but in fantasy in general. Just in terms of the scope, how it's going on for 300 pages, and every single character's story finally converges and to one point where they all grow in some way, or some really rad things happen to them. So I have to give Sanderson credit for being able to write such a wondrous and beautiful kind of battle that's taking place. Of course, there's a number of problems with Oathbringer, which is really a problem with the entire Stormlight Archives series. Again, the Parshendi question is too murky, in particular, slavery. It was in the background in previous stories, but here it's become kind of a centralized theme, because the Parshendi specifically say they were tired of being slaves, and only after they became sentient did the humans consider like letting them go, especially the Parshmen in particular. But to make things worse, there's also the idea that the Voidbringers were originally humans, and they betrayed the Parshendi and enslaved them, and this is why the desolations, the Voidbringers are coming back on a repeated basis. But it's a murky kind of shades of gray scenario where, in normal fantasy, and like it'd be, this is high quality, there's a gray area, and it'll be addressed. But with Sanderson, I don't feel like he's ever going to effectively address it, because he's made it too murky. Essentially, the humans have become the descendants of slave owners who want to maintain control of Roshar, and there's no real alternative here that doesn't make everyone look bad and result in bad writing. Because if you take control of Roshar, it has to be in partnership with the Parshendi. Otherwise, you've effectively depowered these people and made things just as bad as they were before. And also, there's also the question that you're killing these Parshendi, slaughtering them like nobody's business. And sure, the characters do feel bad. Like Kaladin is like, I talked to these people and now I'm witnessing their deaths. I feel terrible about this. But if you kill it, like if you feel bad about someone dying and you still kill them, you're a monster. You're not excused just because you feel bad about it. And I have a feeling that's where this story is going to go, where the Knights Radiant are going to slaughter hundreds of Parshendi on their way to finally defeating Odium, and then there's going to be a moment where they're like, oh, we all feel really bad about that, but you still did it. You were still colonizers killing the people who rose up against you. Or at least the descendants of the people who like rose up against you. And it's really murky and gray. And on top of that, Dalinar killed his wife, and it's getting increasingly hard to relate to these characters because like Sanderson gives them like really dark and unfortunate backstories where they were terrible people. And in addition to all of that, slavery. And you might say, Mr. Nothing, you're reading too much into this, but it's on the paper. It's right there. It's in the story. Kaladin even addresses it. And you might be saying like, oh, well, that's not the direction Sanderson is trying to go, but he brought up the issue. Like, you can't just put this like demon back in the bottle. You can't like shove everything back into a box and pretend like it doesn't exist. This is the world that you created, and you didn't really address it very well in this story. And I know he might do that in future stories, but again, that's a problem of fantasy in general, where you can like bring up an issue, but then you won't address it until like 3 stories later, and that doesn't really feel like good storytelling. Right there. It'd be better if Sanderson was more upfront about which direction he was trying to head. But again, that's also an issue I have with the story, is the pacing, where some characters are given so little time, even though they seem to be a big focus. Like Venli, for example, who's been given like 100 pages of focus over 3 different stories, but like Venli is supposed to be a huge threat, or at least is working on the side of Odium, and I need to know more about this character to like them, and they just feel incredibly vague and whatnot. And that's also seemingly happening to Szeth, where at the end of the last story, like he was the assassin in white, he joined the Knights, or like a section of the Knights Radiant, which is still ill-defined. The Skybreakers don't really know like their origins or anything like that. But the problem is Szeth doesn't show up in the story for 900 pages. And it's like, what was he doing during all of this time? Sanderson does go to some effort to explain it to you, but he's focusing on so many characters that you get so little time with Szeth. And if someone's an important facet of your story, focus on them. Don't wait 900 pages to talk about that character. And this is the overall problem that I've been having for the past 3 stories, is that this is 1,200 pages long, 1,300 pages long or so. A more effective writer than Sanderson could have told an equally great story with less time. You can have your Battle of Thaylen and eat it too, so to speak. But the problem is that by making it so wide and grand scoping, like, you spend a vast amount of time with characters doing nothing, twiddling their thumbs until suddenly they're relevant to the plot. The entire problem with Szeth in the last story, and it seems like this part too. I have seen that he might be the focus of future novels here, which is great, but it shouldn't take you 5 books to get more of a focus on Szeth. Again, if these people are the main focus of your story, focus on them. Do not just shove them into the background and have us forget about them, and to the point where I'm like wondering, oh, what did you tell us about this character before? I don't know when you mentioned that, or did you explain it in some between novel that isn't technically canon or necessary to read, but is also very necessary to read. It's just several problems that prevent it from reaching true excellence in my eyes. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Oathbringer. A pretty fun story. Certainly one of the better fantasy stories that I read, including in the Stormlight Archives series. It's interesting. There's a lot worth thinking about here, especially as it relates to trauma and taking responsibility and achieving your greatest self and all of that. But of course, there's the usual trappings with Sanderson's writing, bad pacing, and characters that don't get enough of a focus. Maybe that's a common theme for fantasy, and an issue with like setting up your next story before you even finished this story. But I'm sure if you like fantasy, this might be the thing for you. Again, if you haven't read the first one, I encourage you to go out and read it. But I think there's a lot of other fantasy writers out there who probably have done what Sanderson is trying to do in a more effective manner, and certainly in a fewer amount of pages. It's a weird thing to get hung up on, I know, but it's the thing that's really dragging this series down. But it's still a pretty good read in my opinion. If you have anything to say about this review or you want to comment on something I said, do so in the comments below. I would love to hear from you and have a discussion with you about Oathbringer. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this book or this author if they haven't already read it. Also, join the Discord if you want to have further conversations about fantasy or books or movies or whatnot. Or until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and radiant travels. Farewell.